Well, hello and welcome everyone to our virtual studio tour of Julia Goodman, our artist chosen for the Women to Watch 2020 Paper Roots exhibition, currently being shown in Washington, D.C., featuring Julia's work. Just a little bit of background of Paper Roots. I'm sure Eileen could say this better, but this is the sixth installment in NMWA's Women to Watch exhibition series. This exhibition showcases contemporary artists like Julia working in paper. And these series are presented, this exhibition series are presented every 2 to 3 years and is a collaboration between the museum and participating committees like ourselves. So thank you, Julia. We are thrilled to support you. And thank you all to the members too for your support of the Paper Roots catalog. So we hope you've enjoyed reading Julia's Q&A, which was posted on our Facebook page and was emailed to all of our members and spread to various social media sites. Today, to get to know more about Julia, she will talk about her concepts, her goals, and her inspirations while walking around her studio. She will also show us some of her new pieces available for purchase. I just also want you just to peek behind me. This is my beautiful piece that Julia created. We'll talk about that later. If you remember from our last artist Zoom call with Amy Tavern, I saw you over there, Amy. Jamie Austin of CCA will be moderating the Zoom call. At the end of the studio visit, I will open up for questions for Julia. Again, thank you to Julia, Jamie, and Lorna for educating all of us of our mission for supporting emerging women artists. And a big welcome to Eileen Goodman, the Deputy Director of NMWA, for joining us on this call. So I will hand it over now to Jamie and Julia.
Thank you, Robin, so much. Thank you for the great introduction. It's so lovely to see so many of you here. I know we're limited to Zoom, but we were just talking about how it's so great to feel community and see each other without masks on. That even it makes it in Zoom. It's certainly better than nothing. So welcome. I'm Jamie Austin, Director of Exhibitions and Public Programs at California College of the Arts, and I'm happy to be moderating this series of virtual studio visits with the 2019 Women to Watch artists. This is our second installment featuring Julia Goodman, and this studio visit is particularly exciting because it marks kind of the opening, the beginning of the Paper Roots exhibition, the Women to Watch exhibition at NMWA in DC that is now open to the public. And I'd also like to thank Robin and Lorna for your support in this series. It's so lovely to see Eileen and so many gallerists and supporters here on this call as well. Robin shared our format, but basically I'll be introducing Julia. Julia will share her work with you for about 30 minutes or so. We have some really exciting work that's live in her studio that she can give you a tour of, and new things that very few people have seen. Everyone's been muted on entry, but if you'd wish to ask a question, we'll have a Q&A time at the end of the call, or you can also type your questions into chat if you're worried that you're going to forget, and we'll come back to those at the end. And similar to Catherine Vetney's journey a few years ago, the opportunities supported by this group have led Julia toward gallery representation. And so as Catherine found, Catherine Clark Gallery, Julia is here with the Yukonam Gallery. And today we are joined by Monique Deschênes, who is the director and owner of Yukonam Gallery in San Francisco. And prior to founding Yukonam Gallery, she was the associate director at Haynes Gallery. So we welcome Monique to the group today, and I see Anton there as well. So welcome from Catherine Clark Gallery. Today, I'm so happy to introduce Julia Goodman. Julia earned an MFA from California College of the Arts and a BA in International Relations and Peace and Justice Studies from Tufts University. I first met Julia years ago. In full disclosure, we were in grad school at CCA at the same time, but it's really only been in the past year since the Surfacing Histories exhibition at the Hubble Street Galleries that I've really gotten a more intimate view into her life as a mother and an artist and a friend. And there's this earnestness in Julia, both in her as a person and in her work that is so clear. And her chosen medium of paper is something that it's living with these shapes and colors and histories that are just waiting to be reconstituted and revealed. And her paper making really feels to me like it's the study in grief, but also the study in healing, and how labor and kind of a deep consideration of time and materials can bind grief and healing and kind of this whole process of living together. And that's something that's really resonated deeply during this time of shelter in place, while we're all apart. So please join me in welcoming Julia, who will share more of her studio practice with us.
Wow, thank you for that introduction, Jamie. That was beautiful. Let's see, I'm gonna go ahead and start screen sharing. See, I hope this works. Here we go. All right, here we go. I have to say just a huge thank you to all of you guys for making time today. While there's so much at stake in the country and everybody's lives are so complicated, I so appreciate you all making time to come together to look at my work and ask questions, and be together. So thank you. And a huge thank you to Robin and Jamie for all of their time and support into organizing this series. And I also wanted to thank Monique, my gallerist who's with us today, and Michael, my husband and studio mate, who really helped me prepare for today. So about this, I'm gonna just dive in. This is an image, it's actually a detail of the part of my studio where my brain kind of hangs out in slow motion for a while. But I'm going to go ahead and start with a little bit of background information about the two pieces that are on display at NMWA right now. And then I'll go into newer work. My father passed away almost 13 years ago, and it led to huge shifts both in my life and in my art practice. One of the big changes was my insane craving for texture. And I was just blown away by the simple fact that when someone passes away, you can't touch them anymore. And it just made me crave texture and just reject flat surfaces in a strange way. Also, the studio really became a place where I could create my own rituals. I could adapt traditions, slow down time, and make more space for life-changing experiences. The wood carving you see in front of you is a wood carving of the 11-month mourning period, beginning with the night my father died. The 11-month mourning period is traditional for a Jewish child to mourn for their parent. From that wood carving 12 years ago, I cast 11 pieces of paper made from pulped junk mail. And I developed this way of casting handmade paper as a way to physically experience grief and move it through my system. It's labor intensive and involves many steps: gathering materials, ripping, tearing, cutting, pulping, pressing by hand, and actually using my own body weight to press out as much water as I can. This piece sort of functions like a calendar, or marking that 11-month period, and it's tracking the phases of the moon during that time period, both because the Jewish calendar is lunar based, but also because I felt comfort in placing the loss of my father in the context of larger cycles of waxing and waning. 3 years after I did that project, I was fortunate to be an artist in residence at Recology San Francisco, which is also known as the Dump. And there I made a huge leap from making paper out of paper to paper out of rags. And there I interviewed an employee, a former employee, who was able to remember the name of 7 of the last rag sorters in San Francisco, a position that ceased to exist after 1964. All of those women were Italian immigrant women. And I carefully carved their names backwards into plywood. This is a process shot on the left. Into plywood and particle board I pulled from the Dump. All of the fonts that you see are in the set of 7 are different pre-1964 book and print material that I pulled from the Dump. So for example, here, Rita Bianchi, this font and design is actually from a program from a 1950s opera performance, and I rearranged and reinvented the font to spell out her name instead of the opera. And I wanted to honor these women's labor, not with ink lying on the surface, but with the fibers themselves, similar to the ones they had handled and sorted 60 years ago. Fast forward to 2019, I gave birth to our son, and during my pregnancy, it felt like a great counterbalance experience to losing my father. And I wanted to mark the experience of bringing a life into the world with the same gravity that I had given to letting go of one. And so the first thing that I did after Irving was born was I charted the 41 months of sorry, that would have been a terrible pregnancy. The 41 weeks of my pregnancy using the same grid format. And so this is the lunar calendar of my pregnancy. And making this wood carving, I should say that the deepest ones are about like a ½ inch. So really gouging out that wood was a way to really create more space to process pregnancy, birth, and life with a newborn that is, you know, not given a lot of time to consider in American culture. And from the two wood carvings, the wood carving from 12 years ago and the wood carving from 2019, I cast this diptych, waning and waxing, that is now on display at NMWA. And this is the one on the left is cast from, sorry, the one that I carved after my father passed away. The one on the right is the 41-week pregnancy. And it was just a way for me to hold these two experiences side by side. And to really think about how losing my father informs how I love our child. I don't quite have words for it, but I can say that this project holds that for me. Over the years, I've learned ways to let the paper dry in a more organic form. And so you'll see these undulating forms kind of refusing to be totally flat, coming off the wall. And also this piece in particular, I really wanted it to feel like there's a life force in the work. And so they're all backed with hot pink pulped t-shirts. And those give, against the white wall, give this like hot pink back glow. And I'll talk more about color in a few slides and hopefully throughout the conversation. So at NMWA on display right now is two larger works and then the smaller set of the rag sorter names. But oftentimes small work leads to larger work and there's a continuation there. This is a piece I made that's called Study for Alluvium. And this piece actually led me to make this larger piece. It's a 37-inch by 37-inch. It's one single piece of paper. And it is made from black t-shirts and the blue bed sheets that are actually from our house, from our bed. And there's two distinct textures here. There's like almost like a shiny flat above the horizon line with almost the blue kind of wave crashing over the black horizon line, with below all of the, it's a matte surface and it's the texture of actually cast bed sheets. This piece, and then I'm gonna go back to that piece in 1 second. This is a process also that I've been developing slowly over the years. And it is me working with handmade paper, working with pulped bedding and pulped t-shirts in an outdoor space. And so I'm pulling these materials outside, and rather than making a mark outside, I'm actually attempting to absorb, listen, and subtly shift the public spaces and hard surfaces. So these are two earlier pieces. The piece on the left is called Juncture. The piece on the right is called Tides. And these are them drawing on the brick wall outside. And then this is actually an installation shot from a group show at UQANAM that was just a few months before the Hubble Street show, with Juncture in the center. Robin, you'll recognize the one on the left, and Alluvium in the corner. And this has been really important for me to see how these different forms hold the space together, how they talk to each other. I returned to that same brick corner to create this new piece called Akimbo. And all of the colors you're seeing in all of my work results from colors that fabric came to me in. The one exception on this piece, if you look on the inside of the piece, there's like a white towards the top and a rusty brick color in the brick imprint. And that's actually parts of the brick building that the paper has lifted off of the building as it's drying. And I love this idea, you know, we think of these hard surfaces as being stronger, but I love that the paper actually can tear off of the brick building as opposed to vice versa. This redefinition of strength is really important for me. And it's also really important for me to take these private materials outside into exterior spaces and to think about how our interior worlds shift public spaces. Here's a detail of the piece installed next to a new piece, a newer piece I've made during shelter in place called Sunset Midwife. And so I'm just going to shift all the work from this point on. It was made during shelter in place, which has felt so intensely informed by our domestic settings and heightened emotions. Anxiety, anger, grief, uncertainty, hope for transformation. And I've really been rethinking ways to incorporate and highlight the raw, torn fabrics back into my work. Sunset Midwife, this piece is actually made from a friend's bed sheet that she used during her home birth 7 years ago. I've been holding on to it for that long, and I didn't know what to do with it until this year, when it was 1 year from the anniversary of me giving birth, but also her sister was about to go into labor. And so I made this piece thinking about like a protective shield for women in labor and new mothers during this time of limited contact and help. So just to be clear, the sheet, this pink and white floral sheet, half of the sheet I pulped, and it results in this like light pink, warm, pale pulp. And then the fabric is actually woven or incorporated in paper making. We would call it an inclusion. And it was really important to me for this piece to start getting more sensitive to the edges. So there's like the more natural deckled edge, and then the more highly structured, formed, sharper lines as well. In addition to working on the brick buildings, I'm also casting paper from the concrete pad between our home and our studio. I'm really drawn to the cracks as they feel like a sign of hope and inevitable transformation. And it really taps into the part of me that prefers imperfect surfaces that hold stories and time over perfect, smooth, perfect surfaces. The colors in this piece are all a gradient pulp that begin with the hot pink sheet in the crack. And they're slowly mixed through shades of magenta, purple to blue by mixing in different amounts of this blue pulped bed sheet. This is a detail shot. So you can get a sense of the texture, but also the grit that the pulp lifts away as it's drying. This is one of the more flat pieces that I've made recently called Timekeeping. This is what time feels like to me during the pandemic. But more importantly, when you get close to this piece, you can really get a sense to how I mix color, and that I'm mixing colors that are, I'm actually mixing fibers to make new colors. And so when you get really close, you get a sense of that. Another piece that I have also just finished recently, where I'm exploring how to incorporate the torn fabric. This is a torn green t-shirt embedded into different colored green, blues, and an orange pulp. And this is all of my work, with the exception of this one piece, I make face down. So there's generally like a leap of faith, or not totally sure how a piece will turn out. And this was the one piece that I've made for some reason where I needed to face it forward as I was making it. The number 18 is the number for life in Judaism. And with all of the numbers and statistics around illness and death and over the last few months, having this number to return to, 18, has been really a source of comfort for me. Here's a detail. Again, it's just hand pressing using sponges, my hands, and various tools I use a plastic spoon a lot in my studio. And then I just wanted to slow down the process and kind of map out the steps for a recent piece I've made. This is a sketch that I made months ago without any sense of color or exactly how the pulp would interact with the torn bed sheets, but knowing I wanted this overlap and just really feeling a need for the negative space in the piece. So this is just an 8.5 by 11 piece. And normally what I'll do is photograph this, and then I'll project it in the studio at different sizes to get a sense of like how I want this sketch to connect or relate in scale to the body. And then the next step is I refine that drawing just on newsprint. And this is actually my map. I work with it to scale. In this map, I haven't decided any of the colors, but the blue lines that you see, those are actually where I've decided I will incorporate fabric into the final piece. And then this is the final piece that I just made. It's actually the reverse of this because I'm working in this face down technique. It's kind of like printmaking in that sense of the backwards. But this is the final piece called Holding Uncertainty, and it's 52 inches long, just to get a sense of scale in front of the body. And this piece was really an important piece because I'm starting to incorporate the torn fabric. I'm letting the fibers really kind of float in the pulp. And I'm also starting to use torn bed sheets to kind of draw a line or to create a different kind of edge that I haven't had to the line quality before. This is a process shot of me working. I don't often take pictures of myself working, but just to get a sense, I'm working flat, I'm working on plexiglass, I'm building up shapes and forms. I'm mixing colors constantly. I use a kitchen blender to further mix colors, but I have a different kind of beater that we can get into to make pulp. And I'm working face down on plexiglass, and that allows me to take breaks, honestly, so that I can go back and forth between my obligations and home and in the studio. I used to work only on wood, but working on the plexiglass this way has actually let me slowly form paper over the course of a week as opposed to a day. And so this has been an exciting breakthrough for me. And then another exciting shift for me during shelter in place is I have started making watercolor sketches. And this, in the past, I've been working with pencil on paper, which I love the simplicity of that, but working wet into wet with watercolor and then translating that into pulp, which I'm working in a wet form, has really opened my eyes and has led to a really interesting call and response and translation. The decision to start edging the line, to start kind of drawing with the torn bedding, that actually came out of that crisp color edge I can get in a watercolor. So that I'm still learning what that means. And then this is the studio where it is currently. And this piece that you see down flat, that is actually me kind of working out how I'm going to dive into this middle watercolor, which is the next piece I'm about to start on. So I'm actually going to stop the share now and shift into the questions. Let me see, did that work? There we go. Okay.
Okay, let me see.
Valerie.
I'm gonna do I unmute myself. Okay, I guess I'm not muted now. Okay, I have a question for you.
Please.
Can you explain what pulping means?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that question. So pulping is the process of taking fibers that are connected. It has to be a cellulose-based fiber, so a plant-based fiber. I work with cotton you know, a fabric, but it's plant-based fabric. So I can't work with like polyester, for example. So it's tearing those bonds apart, those fibers, flooding them with water, adding pressure to them to bruise those fibers open so that they're floating in an open vat of water together. And then from there, we can go to like extracting water to make new connections, if that makes sense. And I have a specific machine. When I made paper out of paper, I could do all of that just with a kitchen blender. Making paper out of fabric, I have a more industrial blender in my studio that I use for making pulp. But it's both, for me, it's the process, but it's also a metaphor for that like tearing apart and coming back together.
And how
I hope
long
I
does it take
answered
to
your
pulp?
question. When you guys come here, I can actually show you the beater and we can
Okay.
do that together.
Okay. I have another question.
Oh, sure. And it looked like
Somebody
Anton
else
has a question in the
Okay, go ahead.
chat as well. I don't know, Anton, if you want to ask it, or I'm happy to read it as well. But he's pointing out the similarity specifically of waning and waxing to flags, and is wondering if there's another narrative that one could make kind of in thinking of the flag as far as a nature divided, or the waxing and waning of democracy and other terms based on that format.
Wow, I love that. I mean, I love that the work is open enough for different interpretations. I have for sure thought of like what a matriarchal country would look like, and I do think it is one that would allow for more time for emotional labor and for caretaking. It's kind of amazing to think of those as potential flags for that country I long for. But I love that reading and I love that question, Anton, or Katie, whoever asked it. Thank you. Wow.
And I think Catherine had a question, and then maybe we'll go back to Robin.
Great.
Thank you. That was really, really lovely, Julia. I'm always so intrigued when I hear, I think I've heard you introduced a couple times now, and I'm always so intrigued to hear you study peace and justice studies. And I was wondering if that type of an education influences your work at all.
Yes, yeah, for sure. There's a long-term thinking in peace and justice studies. There's one woman in particular I studied, Elise Boulding, who advocated for a 200-year present. It's also like the parallel to like the way of thinking of something from cradle to grave. So like I really believe that my artwork doesn't exist just in the finished state. I'm really thinking about where my work where my materials come from and where they will go. And I think that sort of lengthened time period is informed by peace and justice studies. And I think the history, the wanting to dive into the history of rag paper and to the history of paper making, not just for the sake of nostalgia, but really feeling like history holds keys for ways to move forward. That was also informed by my education. Yeah, that kind of just starts to scratch at the surface, but it's definitely foundational to the way I think. I hope. Yeah. Thank you for that question.
Robin, did you have a question?
Yeah, so in the Q&A, one of the questions that we asked you was, do you have a method for creating titles for your work? And can you explain the title here of this piece, which is called Inward?
Oh, yeah. I'm so shy about some of this work, some of that piece. I mean, that was a piece that I made when we were trying to get pregnant, and I was really trying to focus internally. And when I saw it, I made the piece. I don't think I did it on purpose, but when I was done, it felt very much like some hyper fantasy rainbow sonogram, like trying to get my mind ready for pregnancy, basically, without knowing it. That's a very honest, embarrassing answer that I wasn't planning on.
Beautiful, and it brings me joy. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and I should say, interestingly enough, neon yellow, like yellow, turned out to be my son's favorite color. So it's one of the only pieces I've made so far that has yellow in it. So it's a nice foreshadowing. Yeah,
it's wonderful. Thank you.
I'm curious, Julia, I know in the beginning of your presentation, you were saying that your earlier work kind of rejects flatness and that you were working kind of in more kind of a three-dimensional way. And then I noticed, like, as we progress to now, or maybe Shelter in Place, in some ways your work is still very layered, but it's also maybe a little bit more flat. And I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit, but then also maybe show us some of that work in your studio, because I notice a lot of the works in your presentation are hanging behind you. And I think it would be so great to see that dimensionality, even though it's screen-based.
Okay, this is my first time walking around with a backwards. We'll see how this works. Yeah, the movement towards, I've just started to make more flat work in the last year or two. And that was really, like I said, wanting to highlight how I mix colors and how the pulp kind of reconnects. And so by working on a hyper flat surface, it actually shows all of the texture and layers of connections in a flat space. So it's interesting, like I no longer think of a flat space as flat, because I understand that a flat piece of paper is made up of this completely chaotic, intertwined, entangled network of fibers that are reconnected. And I can only show that by flattening out the surface. The texture kind of hides all of those connections, where the flatness highlights them. So I can try to get close here to give you a sense of the marbling, but there's actually, this is where I'm like, I wish you guys could be here. So yeah, the flatness really helped me think of things not being flat anymore. One exciting thing in terms of something being, this is the most sculptural piece in the show, right? Or in the space right now. But it has allowed me to start showing the backside of the pieces as well, which is something that I really want to think about more in the future. But part of that is because it's really important for people to understand that the material, the color is not a surface treatment, but it's actually the material that makes up the whole piece. And so showing the backside of a piece has let me do that. I hope I can see some of these pieces building into larger sculptural installations in the future, like I've done at the Contemporary Jewish Museum, or like I did for my MFA show. I would be lying if I said I thought it was possible to make a large scale sculpture with no childcare and a toddler. So there is there are some constraints I'm working within, but I'm really enjoying diving deeper into form and shape and color at this scale. And also, that sort of protective, this is sort of, some of these are sort of the scale of like almost like a protective shield, made with a very different material, but that's been really important for me. Yeah.
And I mean, I have to say, one thing I really appreciate about you is how connected kind of your work and your life are. And I think that you can talk about, you know, your experience of motherhood and incorporate that into your experience in life. I feel like so often in the art world, kind of motherhood and, you know, the domestic side, you know, is pushed aside. And I think Certainly in this moment of shelter in place, we're very aware of, the connection between the two. But I mean, you alluded to this a little bit in talking about, starting your watercolors and working, but maybe could you talk more about how, new experiences like motherhood or like, shelter in place at home have continued to inform your work?
Yeah, I mean, it's, for example, counting to 18, the site, that is something I'm doing in the studio, but to be honest, that is part of my nighttime routine with Irving. Every night before I put him down to bed, I tell him I love you 18 times. And that is something that I do every night. And yeah. So it impacts me in ways directly like that, but also there's a messiness to it. There's a chaos. There's like the rawness of it. It's important that there be the edge variation. There's like an urgency to the way I want to make work right now. It's important to me that it also be, the surfaces be imperfect, that it not be too beautiful, that there be shifts and changes in the work, because I feel like it is shifting and changing me and challenging me. And I have to say, it feels like such a transformational experience for myself. And then under these circumstances in particular, there's like, I feel like there, for better or for worse, I feel like there's no escaping my domestic surroundings. Thankfully, I'm with these two people. But yeah.
I have a question. Hi, it's so nice to see you
Hi, Amy.
in your space and hear you talk. I really enjoyed that. I want to know more about transformation in your work, both physically and emotionally, psychologically, like however you want to, but I'm interested in like the seen and the unseen with transformation.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the foundation of it, there's a Jewish tradition at the graveside called Korea, which is the act of rendering or tearing one's clothes. I don't think I mentioned this in the beginning, but at the graveside, you would tear your garment over the left side of your chest, so over your heart, and that is an act, that tearing is an act of exposing one's heart. And it's the physical display of grief. And so during that mourning period, whether it be the 30-day mourning period for a family or an 11-month mourning period for your parent, you would walk around with that torn garment. And at the end of that mourning period, you sew up that that tear, which is also specifically not on a seam. So it can't disappear. It's healed. It's no longer in a raw state, but there is a mark left. And I love, shouldn't say I love, I was so moved by that. That's like pretty core to my practice, the idea that something could be torn apart, put back together without any magical secret ingredients, but just the tearing apart, the adding, in my technically adding of water and the extraction of water. There's no glue, there's no magic ingredients holding these things back together. And I love that metaphorically as like transformation, but with what we already have. Not waiting for something new to be that ingredient. Transformation with pre-existing where we are with what we have. And so and then the shaping, the making of new colors is like things, different fabrics from different homes, fabrics from different people being torn apart, mixed together, and actually like forming a new color, but also transforming together, or a type of healing. And embedding the torn fabrics, I'm trying to kind of hold that tension of like the in-process nature of it, or like further revealing that when the pulp is completely pulped and there's none of the bedding there, I feel like I want there to be some of that raw fabric there. So there's like a before and after mixed together, if that makes sense, Amy.
Yeah. Wow, that's beautiful. Thank you.
Thanks for that question.
If anyone else has a question, please just jump in.
Or if anybody wants to see a detail of another piece, I can walk you over to it as well.
I should mute my video. Well, I've been so moved by your tour, Julia. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry,
So thank you very much. And I just want to thank all of you for attending this Zoom call. Beautiful, beautiful tour. And I hope that we see all of you again for the Zoom call on Thursday, October 19th with Sofia Cordova.
Yeah, and I don't remember if I mentioned this, but the catalog arrived yesterday for the show, and it is beautiful. So I wanted to say a special thank you to everybody.
Yes.
Yeah,
Oh, very good.
Oh, look at that.
Really wonderful. And I just want to say that your work is beautiful, and it looks beautiful installed in the galleries, Julia. And I wish you could be there to see it. Tomorrow we are premiering the video of the walkthrough of the galleries, and you are all invited. If you haven't received an invitation, we can just send me an email or send it to Robin. She'll pass it on to us, and we'll get you an invitation to join the video tour of the show tomorrow. Anyway, thank you, Julia, for everything. It's really wonderful.
Thank you for being here, Eileen.
Oh.
I know. Thank you,
Well,
Eileen.
I just want to thank you, Robin, and Amy and Julia especially. This isn't a question, but it's more of a comment. I have been so inspired by your words and also the words of Amy when she did the tour, and Catherine when she was our representative, of how much depth there is in their work, not just visually, but emotionally, and the thought that goes in it is truly amazing. And so it's been such a pleasure to get to know all of you this depth, because so many times we don't get this opportunity with artists. So thank you so much for all of the time you've given us. It's truly an honor for all of us.
Thank you, Lorna. We had a phone conversation, it seems like yesterday and forever ago, where we kind of dreamed up that we could take this online instead of giving up. And I'm so glad it's happening.
Yeah.
Oh,
It's wonderful. Thank you. And you have a beautiful studio, and your work is just amazing.
Thank you.
it is. Oh.
And then, as Robin mentioned, we have another studio visit with Sophia, who's here today in November, where we can learn more about her work. And then in December, we'll have a virtual studio visit with Lava Thomas. And then that will conclude our series of this group of Women to Watch artists. So don't miss those next two events.
We
Right,
can't wait.
I guess it's October. It's November 19th. Yeah, so thank you all so much for attending the Zoom call. And like Jamie mentioned, we have recorded this, so I'll post it on the Facebook page and email to you as well.
Thank you,
So
Robin.
thank you.
So lovely to see all your faces. Thank you so much, you guys.
Thank you, anyone. If anyone has any follow-up questions about Julia's work, they can also touch base directly with Monique, who might be sharing some more information about it.
Great.
Lovely to see everyone. Thank you so much. Have a good evening.
I know. Until then, stay safe, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.